First of all, I want to agree totally with the person over here, right? I think I'm going to urge you at the end of this meeting to all get involved in the Socialist Workers' Party. Obviously, that's what I always do. Do something about capitalism. But even if you don't want to do that, we have to get people out on the streets, right? There has not been a major demonstration in this town yet about the bank bailout, right? And the proposal I'm going to make to this meeting, I'm hoping we may have some discussion about it, is that this government has to pass an emergency law to set up a thing called NAMA to rob us. I want to see tens of thousands on the streets for that time, right? And hope that maybe at the end we can discuss how we do that and how we mobilise and get them moving in this country. Okay, I want to just mainly talk about the solutions, right? The first thing is, I think if we are going to educate people, we have to be aware of the propaganda, right? I mean, everybody's made this point. We live in a controlled society, and the propaganda is coming relentlessly. And here's the main propaganda we're getting. These are, I think, are the 4 points that you'll hear people repeating because it's pushed at them so often. If we cut wages, Ireland will be able to increase its exports, and if we increase our exports, that will mean eventually more people can be taken on, and that's how we solve the crisis. So that's the reason for cutting wages. The second thing you hear all the time is the public sector is bloated, so we have to slim that down, and if we do that, the economy will get going again. The third one I'll deal with some length is NAMA. It's going to solve all the banking crisis. And the last one is that when all of this is done, the government has a plan for the future, long-term plan, which is that Ireland is going to become a smart economy, a knowledge economy, forging ahead, innovating, and as they say, the innovation hotspot or the Silicon Valley of Europe. That's how we're going. Now, let's look at each of these myths in turn. And I want to really go through a little bit carefully. I never thought I'd have to, if you like, spend a long time arguing against wage cuts. I thought it was just so bloody obvious. Wage cuts are a bad idea. But I think it's important, given the level of propaganda, to go through some of the points. The first point is, Irish wages are about 11% below the EU 15. Now you mightn't think that listening to the radio. Where do I get the figure from? The Bureau of Labour Statistics from America, US Bureau of Labour Statistics. These are people who advise American capitalists where to invest. So they have to do the scientific about what the result is, right? Why are Irish wages so much below the EU average? Well, think about it. How many workers in this country are paying the lower rate of tax? About 55%. Irish workers, the bulk of Irish workers are on somewhere between 25,000, 35,000, 36,000 a year. Right? That's the actual where Irish workers come in at. If you compare that to the wages in Germany, Austria, and so on, you'll find Irish wages are lower. Not only that, Irish workers work on average 3 weeks longer a year than their counterparts in the EU 15. Look at the holidays. Check Irish holidays compared to Italian holidays or Greek holidays. We have a lower legal level of holidays. Irish employers pay the lowest PRSI costs in Europe. Social Security costs. So if the argument is we have become uncompetitive, well, why? Look, they've got all this advantage. How can we be so uncompetitive if that's the situation? Now, you might argue, well, that's the wrong comparison, because obviously Irish workers are higher paid than those in Eastern Europe. The average wage in Ireland, that's a bit of a statistical... it doesn't mean people are paid that, unfortunately, right? The average wage in Ireland is around 36,000 a year. The average wage in Poland is around 7,000 a year. So Irish wages are 5 times above 5 times the amount of Polish wages. So think about it. You are 5 times above a Polish worker's wage, and you cut your wage by 10%. So what? You're still 70% higher than a Polish worker's wage, right? In other words, if you want to follow this through, you've got to take a 10% cut this year, a 10% cut next year, a 10% cut for the next 6 years, and meanwhile, the Polish equivalent of IBEC are saying, those bloody Irish are making us uncompetitive. We better push down the Polish wages. So it's a game you can't win. You just can't win this game. So the idea that you can create jobs by cutting wages, it doesn't make the slightest sense. It doesn't even make sense on the facts. What are the 2 exports from Ireland, right? The 2 biggest exports from Ireland, manufacturing exports, are chemicals and pharmaceuticals. 3/4 of Irish manufacturing exports comes from these 2 sectors. I used to make the joke about, most of it's from Viagra, but in fact I was corrected last night by a worker from Pfizer. Most of the pharmaceuticals are for an anti-cholesterol drug called Lipitor, Pfizer's big product. Anyway, the point is that the wages of people in the pharmaceutical industry, wage cost is around 19 euros an hour. The average wage, the average across the whole economy, is about 15 euros an hour. In other words, the most successful areas of exports are the areas where workers are paid the highest. The least successful area of export is textiles, which are paid below the average industrial wage. So it just doesn't make sense. The equation low wages equals more exports equals more jobs. The chain of logic breaks down completely. And that is even before we get to the classic argument raised by an economist of the 30s, Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, who points out a number of basic points about Keynes was an economist who was a conventional economist, believed in balancing the budgets, believed all the nonsense until the Wall Street crash. And then he had to open his eyes and work things out. And there was a debate in Britain at the time, same as we have here, except there was a debate at least in the 1930s, about should you cut wages. And Keynes points out, well, if you cut wages, that's going to, as he put it, decrease aggregate demand. People have less money in their pockets to buy goods. If you have less money to buy goods, then less workers will be taken on, so you actually increase the level of unemployment and worsen the recession. He also points out, if you actually decrease wages, a capitalist will not invest because they'll hope that you'll decrease wages even further. If you think, for example, the housing market, I mean, most of you, I'm sure, are sensible. You wouldn't go out and buy a house even if you had the money at the moment. You'd hold off because you reckon the housing prices are going to go further and further down. And similar, if you're a capitalist, you wouldn't take on workers at the moment. You'd hope that the wages would be pushed down further and further. So for all these reasons, wage cuts always deepen a recession, always make it worse. And they know it, because as the initial thing I brought up from my back indicated, it would have a deflationary effect. Okay, the second myth that we're given is the public sector. I won't say too much about this, just to say it's a lie and a propaganda. Just plain lies and propaganda. It is not true that Ireland has a huge public sector compared to the size of the labour force. This is the OECD. These are right-wingers. This is what they say, right? In fact, they say it's about the average in terms of OECD countries. It's just not true that public sector is higher here than elsewhere. We can take this up discussion if you want. Maybe just take it now quickly. Look. The idea that public sector workers are privileged, they don't pay for their pensions, it's just missing some basic facts. Public sector workers pay 6.5% towards their pension. Anybody who's taken on after 1995, you pay 6.5%. The average contribution in the private sector, if you're lucky enough to get a pension, is about 5%. Okay? It's not true you can't lose a job in the public sector. I mean, I'm shop steward in UCD. We've got 400 people who work as researchers. We just won a case against UCD in terms of winning people the right to what they call a contract of definite duration. What do? They want to change the rules in UCD to bring in compulsory redundancy. Right? They want to push people out. It's just not true. You can't be sacked. I tell you, if you go to the health service, 14,000 workers in the health service, about 1 in 10 are on temporary contract. And that's how it works increasingly in the public sector these days. The last point is, watch smart asses who play with statistics, right? Just watch them. And you'll always find people say, well, the average of the public sector wage is this, and the average of the private sector wage is this. It's like saying, the average of the size of an orange is this, and the average of the size of an apple is this. Because you're comparing two different things rather than the same. There's not a set of private sector Gardaí, private sector teachers, and so on. You're not comparing like with like, okay? So you play statistical tricks.